Now, here is a great example of how an official version of events are being manipulated before your very eyes. Just watch this small clip from this morning's Sunday Politics with Andrew Neil.
Now, the news is dominated this morning by stories swirling around allegations of an historic Westminster paedophile ring. Concern has grown because of the disappearance of a dossier handed over to the Home Office in 1983, along with over 100 official files relating to it and possibly containing details of historic child abuse investigations. Labour's calling for a public inquiry led by a senior child protection official into the allegations. But speaking earlier on the Andrew Marr show this morning, the Education Secretary, Michael Gove, ruled that out.
I think the most important thing that we need to do is to ensure that the due process of law pursues those who may be guilty of individual crimes. Indeed. And we also learn lessons about what may or may not have gone wrong in the past. But it's also important, I think, to emphasise that many of the allegations that are being made are historic, and that what we do now in order to keep children safer is immeasurably better and stronger than was the case when 20 or 30 years ago.
Without getting into a boring tit-for-tat, public inquiry, yes or no?
No.
Ignore my reflection in Gove's jacket, but did you notice them creating the official version of events? Just listen again to these specific parts.
Now, the news is dominated this morning by stories swirling around allegations of an historic Westminster paedophile ring and possibly containing details of historic child abuse investigations.
But it's also important, I think, to emphasise that many of the allegations that are being made are historic.
You see, they are telling you that these allegations are historic. It's called a talking point, and you will hear the allegations called historic every time this pedo ring is mentioned. This does two things. Because the general public are stupid, because they're dumb, because they're pathetic, because they're lazy, and because they only believe the man on the telly and what he says. So firstly, they will switch off once they think that they're talking about something that happened years ago.
Historic.
After all, they've got bright socks to wear and a beard to grow. Secondly, as the general public lose interest because the pedo ring, they told us, happened years ago,
Historic.
Cameron will be able to get away without having to dig too deep. Because as Cameron knows, and Andrew Neil knows, and Michael Gove knows, this paedophile ring is not historic. It may have started decades ago, but rest assured it's still going on today. The other thing I'd like to point out is this. Look at Michael Gove. With his snazzy glasses and his well-kept hair, is he a paedophile? I ask because why wouldn't he want a public inquiry to root out this scum?
Tit-for-tat, public inquiry, yes or no?
No.
Because there are so many allegations of pedo MPs, I now view every single MP with suspicion of being a paedophile, especially Gove, until it's proved otherwise. I have no other evidence on Gove other than that he's an MP, but if I was an MP, I would do all that I could to convict these little pervert scum. So Michael Gove, the jury's out on you, and I'm afraid it'll also be out on anybody else who offers up flimsy excuses for not wanting to get to the bottom of this problem. That brings me on to the three guests. One has snazzy socks. No doubt he's a complete trendy. Anyway, listen to their replies into having a public inquiry into the Westminster paedophile ring.
Well, that was clear enough. Helen, can the government go on resisting calls for a full-scale inquiry?
It's very hard because there are cynical and non-cynical reasons for calling for an inquiry. The cynical one is it allows you to say, I can't comment on this, there's an inquiry ongoing. The non-cynical is the fact that it manages to get people to air allegations in a way that is safe, that is non-prejudicial. What we saw at the Leveson inquiry, I think, was really helpful. People who felt they had been shut out from justice, getting a chance to tell their side of the story. For that reason, I think a public inquiry in this case is a good idea. The danger for Labour is they have called for a lot of public inquiries. There was a list made in 2012 of just how many they call for. Not only Savile, but things like the West Coast Main Line, PIP breast implants. So it can look like a knee-jerk response that everything gets a public inquiry.
But on this particular issue, the people just don't trust the politicians. They don't trust the police either, because they may have been complicit in a cover-up. And they may not even trust the Home Office, who we're told some of their officials were mentioned in the dossier.
Yes, they may not trust the police, but that is what David Cameron is hanging on to at the moment. He's saying this is a matter now because they are alleged criminal activity. It's for the police to investigate. And it's interesting, in that big piece in the Sunday Times by Tim Shipman, he reports that one of the people who's making the allegations lives in the United States, and the police have actually been out to the United States to interview him. So the Prime Minister would say that's how serious the police are taking it. But the problem for the Prime Minister, he is absolutely allergic to big public inquiries. Curious, because his finest moment as Prime Minister was his response to the Bloody Sunday inquiry shortly after he became Prime Minister. But that inquiry took 12 years to report, cost many hundreds of millions, and David Cameron believes that they are costly and a waste of, not a waste of time, but take up too much time.
The problem is the dossier has gone missing. The files have gone missing. More allegations keep coming out, either directly or indirectly. It doesn't look like it's going to go away.
I think that the fact that the dossiers are missing means it is probably inappropriate for the Home Office alone to be investigating this, but they're not doing it alone. There is also a police investigation. If after that there are questions unanswered which can only be answered by a public inquiry, or which require resources that can only be commanded by a public inquiry, then I could see the case for going down that road. I just fear that sometimes in this country we invest almost supernatural powers in what a public inquiry can do. And I wonder whether internationally there is another example of a country which goes through this stale ritual every few years of a scandal emerging, the opposition calling for an inquiry, the government saying no initially and then either holding the line or giving in. I don't know what we ultimately think these inquiries can do.
Well, I think it comes back to your point, Helen, that you should be careful what you call an inquiry on, so you don't devalue the concept. Could seem to be there'd be nothing more important than child abuse.
Now, I'm not calling these journos pedos, but it is interesting that none of them are bothered about the idea of a public inquiry. Why would that be? It's because they have been put on this show to sell a story, and that story is that it's all historical, as Andrew Neil knows it's not, so that people can do nothing about it and let's just move on and forget all about it. Their job this morning was to make a public inquiry sound long-winded, boring, costly, to make the zombies think, so what if some MPs were rogering kids historically? Let's just move on. We need to keep the pressure up because this could be the straw that breaks the camel's back. In my mind, I keep coming back to what was it that Jimmy Savile used to procure for Prince Charles? I wonder.